Eslake. It's my pleasure today to introduce the newest member of our team at InEconomics. That's Rear Admiral retired Rowan Moffitt. Rowan has had a distinguished career in Australia's Defence Force, serving as, among other things, Fleet Commander and Deputy Chief of Australia's Navy. Since retiring from the Defence Forces, Rowan has been a strategic advisor and consultant on geopolitical and, in particular, defence and strategy issues. Rowan, welcome to InEconomics. It's great to be able to talk with you.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Saul. It's very nice to be with the team at InEconomics. It's quite an exciting prospect. I look forward to it.
And it's timely this week to be thinking about these matters because if I had a better pair of binoculars and the world was flat, I'd have been able to look out my window and see 3 Chinese Navy ships conducting exercises in the waters a couple of 100 kilometres to the east of where I live in Tasmania. Let's start by asking you, what were they doing and what were they hoping to achieve by what they're doing?
The visit to a near region by 3 PLA, that's People's Liberation Army Navy vessels, has generated an enormous amount of interest. And I think it has also unearthed or shone a spotlight on what Alan Gingell wrote, a very good book some years ago called Fear of Abandonment, which is an expression of the Australian population's great sensitivity to our isolation in the world. And so when we have an event like 3 Chinese ships turning up in our region, in our waters, we would say, it's very unusual. China in particular, the sensitivity here is not the fact that they're warships so much, it's that they're Chinese warships. And what are they doing here? Why are they here? What's their purpose? I think in a broader contextual sense, it's important to understand that we've been doing this ourselves, we the Australian Navy and many other navies, and more broadly, Defence Forces, have been doing similar things for decades. In my Navy career, I spent a lot of time cruising around Southeast Asian and North Asian waters in the Pacific, doing precisely the sorts of things, including live weapon firings on the high seas that the Chinese have just done down here. I think it's important, in fairness, to understand that the Chinese have broken no rules of the international order. They have not transgressed the laws of the sea, the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. Everything that they've done has been consistent with the norms of good behaviour, with one possible exception, and that was that they perhaps didn't give us as much warning as we might have wished for that they were going to do live firings. And it would be normal. Most navies will do high seas firings. It's quite a normal thing for navies to do, to keep in practice. But we will normally give 24 hours, maybe 48 hours notice, sometimes longer, that we're going to do it and roughly where we're going to do it, so that particularly international aviation is alerted in good time and can take avoiding action to keep everybody safe. The objective is to make sure that when you do these things, that nobody is put at unnecessary risk. So it might be reasonable to suggest that we would have liked some earlier notice from the Chinese ships that they were going to do that. The one significant difference, I think, between what Australia has traditionally done with these sorts of things in other people's parts of the world is that we have coincided our activities with a great deal of goodwill port visits to other countries. I've been a part of task groups of Australian ships, in some cases 8, 9, 10 ships, including submarines, where we have visited and exercised with other countries bordering the South China Sea, for example, quite routinely, quite regularly. In fact, in a previous job, I was part of the planning process for each year's activities a year in advance for the things that we would do. So we'd visit Southeast Asia and call in at Indonesia and Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand and the Philippines, and even up to and including Japan, where we would do live firings in exercise activities with Japan. So there's nothing unusual about this. The Chinese don't appear to have done that. That is to say, they don't appear to have connected this deployment with goodwill visits to anywhere else. We do know that these three ships are a small break-off group from a larger task group that was operating in the South China Sea, and they've arrived in Australia from two different routes to join up to the east coast of Australia down to the south, and it would appear that what they might be going to do is head west across the Southern Ocean and then turn northwards again. And of course, as I say, entirely legal, legitimate, and of no cause, I don't believe, for concern about this being any sort of threat. And I just pause there to examine the notion of threat for a minute. A threat in a military sense, and the reason I want to do this is because I think it then leads neatly into explaining what are they trying to achieve. So a threat can be construed when you have two things: capability and intent. And if you have the intent to use in a military sense, if you have or express or demonstrate the intent to use the military capability against another country, then that constitutes a threat. In the case of the Chinese ships, there is absolutely, in my view, a very significant intent to demonstrate capability. But we have no reason to believe that there is any intent to use that capability against us. The Chinese have expressed no interest, nor have they taken actions which in reality constitute a threat to Australia in any way. Now, we do know that they have fired flares and used lasers and whatnot against Australian Defence Force aircraft in the South China Sea, which is very much their territory. They also did that across the north of Australia a couple of years ago. But none of those things necessarily demonstrate an intent to inflict harm or damage. They're demonstrations of capability more than they are real threats or demonstrations of intent.
I had read or heard that one of the objectives of the Chinese in this most recent exercise was to give their personnel experience in operating a very long distance away from home. That this may be one of the longest distances that a flotilla of this size has ever gone away from Chinese shores, other than perhaps from their base in Djibouti in Africa. And maybe they're doing it down here because the alternative would be to do it in northern Pacific waters that might have attracted a great deal of attention from the Americans. Would that have been a consideration for them as well?
I think it's absolutely a consideration. And the fact of the matter is that long duration and long distance deployments of ships away from home ports present unique suites of challenges for the operating Navy. We know that from our own experience. In the case of the Chinese, they have now built themselves the largest and are operating the largest Navy in the world. They have exceeded the United States Navy in size. And they've done that very rapidly over the course of the last decade or so. We've seen really quite startling production of ships. In fact, one of the ships in this group, a very powerful cruiser, designed and built in China, they delivered, I think I'm right in saying, 8 of those ships, large complex cruisers. They delivered 8 of them in the last 10 years, or it might be the other way around, 10 in the last 8 years. But it's about that. So their rate of growth of the fleet has been extraordinarily rapid, and it is a demonstration of their industrial capacity, which is a maturing capacity in terms of sophistication. That's important from our point of view to understand from two perspectives. One is that we have constantly underestimated the pace at which they have achieved the milestones that they appeared to be heading for, and being able to design your own aircraft, design your own ships, design your own cars is one. So to think that it's just a relatively simple milestone is to misunderstand the difficulties of getting to and then sustaining your ability to do those sorts of things. And the same is true when it gets to submarine design. To come back to your point, however, it is true to say, I think, that this is a learning experience for the Chinese in terms of long-distance deployments. Being the owner of the world's largest navy, we should quite legitimately expect that they will be seen very much further afield than may have been the case even 10 years ago. Now, you mentioned their base in Djibouti, which they visit from time to time. They don't have anything permanently based there, as far as I'm aware. But we have also seen them make goodwill visits to the west coast of the United States. 15 years ago, we saw last year, I think it was, that they had a task group visiting the Baltic. And so we are seeing and have seen over time the Chinese Navy spreading its wings and being seen to be more of a globally capable force. And that's the point of what they've been doing here. It's growing their own capabilities and experience levels in a relatively less experienced Navy when it comes to long range, long duration task group deployments. But at the same time, it's a demonstration of capability to, we might say in this case, to Australia. And yes, absolutely, Australia and New Zealand, they are demonstrating their ability to be here when they choose, but they're also making that demonstration to the rest of the world. And whilst we might consider ourselves to be the principal audience for this demonstration, I would say that probably the much more principal audience for this demonstration by the Chinese is America.
You made the point before about the distinction between intent and capability. As I understand it, one of China's strategic intentions is to deny the US Navy and military more broadly dominance in the Western Pacific, to be, if you like, the military hegemon in this particular time zone, in this part of the world. Is this a significant step towards making clear that intent and the capability to enforce it?
The short answer to your question is yes, but there is a question of being the hegemon, and that's a matter for debate.